Do you ever feel like you're performing your identity? Like everything about you is a role, carefully constructed to be accepted, loved, and safe? You wake up exhausted from being someone else. You smile when you're dying inside. You say, "I'm fine," when your soul is screaming. But what if that version of you is a mask? And what lies beneath isn't broken, just waiting? Carl Jung wrote the Red Book not to teach us, but to remember himself. And in doing so, he gave us the courage to unmask what we've been hiding from the world and from ourselves. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own life, this is for you. There's something haunting about a brilliant mind unraveling. Even more haunting when that unraveling becomes the very thing that saves not just them, but countless others who come after. Carl Jung was one of the most influential minds of modern psychology. But even among his many works, the Red Book stands apart. Not as theory, but as revelation. Picture this. The year is 1913. Jung, already established, already respected, finds himself spiraling into what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. His break with Freud had left him professionally isolated, but something deeper was happening, something that would either destroy him or transform him completely. Rather than resist the descent, Jung did something radical. He surrendered to it, and he documented everything. The Red Book became more than a journal. It became a portal, a bridge between the rational mind and the mysterious depths of the psyche. In it, he recorded his descent into the unconscious, not in academic prose, but in vivid images, hand-painted mandalas, poetic dialogues, and encounters with figures that seemed to emerge from the deepest wells of human experience. For 16 years, Jung worked on this book, but he never published it. It felt too personal, too raw, too revealing. It wasn't until 2009, almost 50 years after his death, that the world finally saw what Jung had discovered in his darkest hour. And what he found wasn't madness. It was a map, a terrain of the human soul that each of us must eventually navigate if we want to become who we truly are. Pause here. Did a part of you just whisper, "This is me"? Because Jung's journey isn't unique. It's universal. The only difference is that most of us never allow ourselves to go that deep. We're too afraid of what we might find, too afraid of losing control, too afraid of discovering that everything we thought we knew about ourselves was just the surface. But what if the very thing you're running from is the very thing that will set you free? You've been taught to be good, to be nice, to be acceptable. But what happened to the parts of you that were deemed unacceptable? Where did your anger go? Your wildness? Your raw, unpolished truth? They didn't disappear. They went underground. Jung called this the shadow, not because it's evil, but because it lives in the darkness of what we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. In the Red Book, Jung doesn't just theorize about the shadow. He meets it, face to face, in visions that were so vivid, so disturbing, and so transformative that they changed the course of psychology forever. The shadow appears to him as violent figures, seductive tricksters, and dark mirrors of his own soul. Sometimes it destroys, sometimes it creates, but always reveals. Consider Sarah, a woman who spent 32 years being the perfect daughter. Always agreeable, always helpful, always putting others first. She wore kindness like armor, but underneath, a rage was building. A rage at being invisible, at being taken for granted, at having no voice in her own life. When her mother criticized her again for not trying hard enough in her marriage, something snapped. For the first time in her life, Sarah screamed. She said things that had been festering for decades. And afterward, instead of feeling guilty, she felt alive. That rage wasn't the enemy. It was her life force, distorted by years of suppression. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's your power, your creativity, your authenticity, all the parts of you that were exiled because they threatened someone else's comfort. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, it means you're ready. Don't turn away. The shadow holds your anger, yes, but it also holds your passion, your sexuality, your fierce protectiveness, your wild creativity, your ability to say no. your permission to take up space. When you integrate your shadow, when you stop running from these disowned parts, you don't just become better. You become whole. You stop performing goodness and start embodying truth. But integration isn't about acting out every impulse. It's about acknowledging what's there, listening to what your anger is trying to tell you, understanding why you feel jealous, greedy, or resentful. Because underneath every shadow emotion is a need that hasn't been met, a boundary that's been crossed, or a truth that's been silenced. The shadow doesn't want to destroy your life. It wants to save it. But first, you have to stop pretending it doesn't exist. What part of yourself have you silenced just to feel loved? We all wear masks. At work, you're the competent professional. With your family, you're the responsible one. With friends, you're the fun one. Even alone, you might find yourself performing for an invisible audience, maintaining an image that no one is even watching. Jung called this the persona, the socially acceptable version of you. It's not inherently bad. We need it to function in society. But problems arise when the mask becomes so tight, so constant, that you forget there's a face underneath. The ego, meanwhile, is the manager of your consciousness. It's the part of you that says, I am this kind of person and I would never do that. It tries to maintain order, keep you safe, and present a coherent identity to the world. But it also keeps you trapped in a very small version of who you could be. In the Red Book, Jung paints the ego as fragile, a tight circle trying to hold back the vastness of the unconscious. It's like trying to contain the ocean in a teacup. The effort is exhausting and ultimately impossible. Meet David, a marketing executive who built his entire identity around being successful. He worked 70-hour weeks, drove the right car, lived in the right neighborhood, and dated women who looked good on his arm. But at 34, he found himself sitting in his corner office, staring out the window, and feeling absolutely nothing. No joy, no excitement, no sense of purpose, just emptiness. He'd achieved everything his ego told him he wanted, but he'd never asked what his soul actually needed. The persona had become his prison. The successful, driven, always-on version of himself was suffocating the parts of him that craved quiet, creativity, and deep connection. You've carried this long enough. Let yourself be still for once. This is why your life might look successful to everyone else, but still feel empty to you. You've built it on a foundation of shoulds instead of wants, of expectations instead of authentic desires. You've followed a script written by your family, your culture, your conditioning. Everyone except the person who actually has to live the life. The ego wants to keep you safe, but its definition of safety is often limitation. It would rather you stay small and predictable than risk expansion and uncertainty. It whispers things like, don't quit your job. What will people think? Don't express that feeling. It's too much. Don't take that risk. You might fail. Don't change. You might lose everything you've worked for. But what if failure isn't the opposite of success? What if it's the price of authenticity? What if the things you might lose by being yourself aren't actually worth keeping? Jung realized that the journey to wholeness requires what he called ego death. Not literal death, but the death of the false self. The version of you that you constructed to survive, to be loved, to fit in, to succeed in a world that often rewards conformity over authenticity. This death is terrifying for the ego because it threatens everything it thinks it knows about who you are. It's like asking a character in a play to step outside the script, leave the stage, and discover they're actually the actor playing the role. The ego doesn't want to admit it's been playing a part because then it would have to face the question, who am I when I'm not performing? But on the other side of that death is rebirth. Not as a better version of your old self, but as who you actually are underneath all the layers of conditioning and expectation. Not as the person you thought you should be, but as the person you are when no one is watching, when there's nothing to prove, when you can finally exhale and let yourself be. Who would you be if you didn't have to be anyone at all? The question isn't whether you'll shed the mask eventually. The question is whether you'll do it consciously, with intention and courage, or whether life will force it off through crisis, breakdown, or the slow erosion of meaning. Who would you be if you didn't have to be anyone at all? There's a reason you keep looking for something outside yourself to complete you. A reason you fall into relationships hoping someone else will heal the ache inside. A reason you feel like half of yourself is missing, wandering through the world searching for its other half, convinced that somewhere out there is the person who will make you whole. But what if that other half isn't out there? What if it's been inside you all along, waiting to be recognized, integrated, loved? Jung discovered that deep within the psyche live two archetypal energies that shape how we love, feel, create, and relate to the world. The Anima, the feminine within the masculine psyche. The Animus, the masculine within the feminine psyche. But this isn't about gender roles or biological sex. This is about the fundamental energies that create wholeness within every human soul. The receptive and the active, the feeling and the thinking, the intuitive and the logical, the being and the doing. In the Red Book, Jung's encounters with these archetypal figures are some of the most profound and beautiful passages ever written about the human psyche. The feminine appears to him in many forms, sometimes as Sophia, the wise woman who speaks in riddles and reveals hidden truths. Sometimes as the witch, dark and dangerous and utterly honest. Sometimes as the lover, seductive and mysterious. Sometimes as the mother, nurturing and protective and all-encompassing. She speaks in dreams and intuition, in body wisdom and emotional truth. She is the part that knows without knowing how it knows, that feels the undercurrents of meaning beneath the surface of things, that connects to the sacred through beauty, relationship, and the cycles of nature. The masculine appears as the king, noble, protective, sovereign over his domain. As the warrior, fierce, focused, willing to fight for what matters. As the sage, wise, discerning, able to cut through illusion with the sword of truth. As the lover, passionate, creative, fully alive. He represents clarity, direction, action, and discernment. He is the part that cuts through confusion, stands firmly in truth, creates structure from chaos, and moves decisively toward goals. Consider Elena, a successful attorney who spent her life developing her animus, her inner masculine. She was brilliant, strategic, logical. She could argue any case and win, could outthink, outwork, and outperform almost anyone in her field. She was powerful, respected, financially independent. Everything she'd been taught to want. But she felt empty, disconnected from her body, her emotions, her intuition. In relationships, she was either the caretaker, using her strength to solve everyone else's problems, or the competitor, turning love into another arena where she had to prove her worth. She was never the beloved, never the one who could soften and receive, never the one who could be vulnerable and still feel safe. Her anima, her receptive, feeling, intuitive nature had been starved for decades. She'd learned to distrust anything that couldn't be analyzed, to dismiss feelings as weakness, to push through exhaustion instead of listening to her body's wisdom. It wasn't until her burnout became so severe that she couldn't think clearly anymore that she began to pay attention to the parts of herself she'd abandoned. She started painting again, something she'd loved in college but abandoned as impractical. She began to meditate, to sit with feelings instead of immediately problem-solving them. She started dancing, going to therapy, spending time in nature. And for the first time in years, she felt like herself. Not the lawyer's self, not the successful self, not the competent self, but the whole self, the integrated self, the self that could be both strong and soft, both powerful and receptive. Take a breath. What part of you have you been starving? Most of us overdevelop one side and neglect the other, creating an inner imbalance that shows up in every area of our lives. Men are often taught to suppress their anima, their sensitivity, their emotional depth, their intuitive knowing, their need for beauty and connection. They become walking heads disconnected from their hearts and bodies, trying to navigate life through logic alone. Women are often taught to distrust their animus, their power, their clarity, their ability to take up space and speak truth, their capacity for focused action and healthy aggression. They become eternal nurturers, giving themselves away until there's nothing left, unable to access their own direction and strength. But integration is possible. It's the secret to becoming whole, to ending the endless search for completion outside yourself. When a man integrates his anima, he doesn't become feminine. He becomes full. He can feel deeply without losing his strength. He can be vulnerable without losing his power. He can love without losing himself. He becomes magnetic because he's no longer rejecting half of human experience. When a woman integrates her animus, she doesn't become masculine. She becomes complete. She can be soft without being weak. She can be nurturing without being self-sacrificing. She can be powerful without being cold. She becomes irresistible because she's no longer hiding her light. This integration is why some people feel so magnetic, so alive, so whole. They've stopped rejecting parts of themselves. They've stopped trying to be half a person looking for another half to complete them. They've become complete within themselves. And paradoxically, this is when real love becomes possible. Not the desperate grasping for someone to complete you. Not the unconscious projection of your unlived life onto another person, but the joyful sharing of your wholeness with another whole person. Jung wrote about this as the sacred marriage, the hieros gamos, the union of opposites within the self. It's the deepest form of healing, the most profound form of coming home to yourself. What would it feel like to stop rejecting parts of yourself? You are not here to choose between your strength and your softness. You are here to become both. You are not here to be half a person, searching endlessly for your other half. You are here to discover that you have always been whole, that the love you've been seeking outside yourself has been living inside you all along, waiting for you to turn inward and finally come home. Everything in Jung's work points to one ultimate destination, the discovery of the self, not the ego, that fragile manager of consciousness that thinks it's running the show, not the personality, that collection of traits and tendencies that make you recognizable to others, not the roles you play or the masks you wear or the story you tell about who you are, but the deepest, truest you, the center where all opposites meet and reconcile, where light and shadow dance together, where masculine and feminine energies unite, where the personal becomes transpersonal and the individual touches the universal. He called this journey individuation. It's the most sacred task of human life and also the most misunderstood. It's not self-improvement, becoming a better version of who you already are. It's not self-actualization, achieving your potential within the existing framework. It's something far more radical and beautiful. Becoming who you actually are underneath all the layers of conditioning, expectation, trauma, and survival. In the Red Book, this journey is painted in images that are sometimes beautiful, sometimes terrifying, always profound. Serpents devouring their own tails in endless cycles of death and rebirth. Figures dying in fire only to emerge transformed from the ashes. Mandalas spinning with sacred geometry that seems to organize chaos into meaning. Light emerging from darkness. Order arising from disorder. Wholeness blooming from fragmentation. It's not a straight line. It's not a ladder you climb or a mountain you conquer. It's a spiral, a labyrinth, a dance. You think you've healed something, integrated something, learned something, and then life brings you deeper into the same lesson, but from a different angle, at a different level. Each time, you're not going backwards. You're going deeper. The self is paradoxical in the most beautiful way. It's both deeply personal, more you than you've ever been, and utterly universal, connected to something far greater than your individual story. It's the you that exists beyond your history, beyond your wounds, beyond your achievements and failures. It's the you that was there before you learned to doubt yourself, before you took on others' expectations, before you decided you needed to be different than you are. The you that will remain when everything else falls away. Consider Marcus, a man who spent his 40s in what he called the great unraveling. His marriage ended, not in anger or betrayal, but in the slow recognition that they had grown into incompatible people. His business failed, not through any fault of his own, but because the industry shifted and left him behind. His father died, suddenly, unexpectedly, taking with him the last remnants of Marcus's childhood and any possibility of resolving their complicated relationship. For months, Marcus felt like he was drowning. Everything he'd built his identity on had crumbled. He was no longer a husband, no longer a successful entrepreneur, no longer someone's son. He was nobody, and the terror of that emptiness nearly broke him. But slowly, in the silence of his empty apartment, in the long walks through the woods where no one knew his name or his story, in the spaces between who he used to be and who he was becoming, something else began to emerge. Not a new identity to grasp onto, not another role to play, but a way of being that felt ancient and familiar, like remembering something he'd always known but had forgotten. He stopped trying to rebuild his old life and started listening to what wanted to emerge. He started writing poetry for the first time since college. Not because he thought he could make money at it, but because the words demanded to be written. He began volunteering with hospice patients, not to fix or heal, but simply to be present with them in their final journey. He fell in love again, but differently this time. Not from need or loneliness, but from wholeness, from a desire to share his fullness rather than fill his emptiness. If you've been waiting for permission to become yourself, this is it. The self doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't announce itself with bells and whistles. It emerges in quiet moments of recognition. When you choose to tell the truth instead of what people want to hear, when you follow your curiosity instead of your fears, when you disappoint others in order to honor yourself, when you stop performing and start simply being. Jung reminds us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This isn't about finding your purpose in some grand, external way, the career that will fulfill you, the relationship that will complete you, the achievement that will validate you. This is about aligning with the current that was always moving through you, the essence that was always there waiting to be recognized. It's about stopping the constant self-improvement and starting the sacred work of self-acceptance. It's about recognizing that you are not a project to be completed, but a mystery to be lived. It's about understanding that your wounds aren't obstacles to overcome, but gateways to compassion. It's about realizing that your struggles aren't signs of failure, but evidence of your humanity. The self includes everything: your light and your shadow, your strength and your vulnerability, your successes and your failures, your joy and your sorrow. It doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to be real. It doesn't want you to transcend your humanity, but to fully embody it. What if you already are who you're meant to become? And when you touch this place, when you stop performing and start being, when you stop trying to become someone else and start accepting who you are, something shifts in your entire experience of life. You stop seeking validation because you're no longer abandoning yourself. You stop trying to control everything because you trust your ability to respond to whatever comes. You stop looking for meaning outside yourself because you recognize that you are the meaning you've been seeking. This is what Jung discovered in his own descent into the unconscious. This is what the Red Book maps out in symbols and stories and sacred images. This is what becomes possible when you stop running from yourself and start walking toward who you've always been. You're not broken. You never were. You were just buried under layers of adaptation and expectation and the need to survive in a world that often rewards conformity over authenticity. But survival is no longer enough. Now it's time to live. Now it's time to remember. Now it's time to come home. So where do you begin this journey home to yourself? How do you start unraveling the layers of conditioning that have kept you from your true nature? How do you begin the sacred work of individuation in a world that profits from your unconsciousness? Not by reading more books, though books can point the way. Not by taking another course or workshop, though guidance can be helpful. Not by finding the perfect therapist or guru or methodology, though support is valuable. You begin by listening, really listening, to the dreams that wake you at 3 a.m. with messages your conscious mind refuses to hear. To the discomfort that rises when you're living out of alignment with your deepest truth. To the quiet whisper underneath all the noise that says, "This isn't who I really am." to the body that tenses when you're betraying yourself and relaxes when you honor your truth. You begin by asking different questions. Not how do I fix myself, but what part of me is trying to emerge? Not how do I become better, but what am I pretending not to know? Not what's wrong with me, but what's trying to be born through me? Are you brave enough to ask what you're really afraid of? You begin by creating space for what Jung called active imagination, the practice of conscious dialogue with your unconscious. This isn't passive daydreaming or wishful thinking. It's a deliberate engagement with the images, symbols, and figures that arise from the depths of your psyche. Keep a dream journal. Your dreams are letters from your unconscious, containing wisdom your waking mind can't access. Pay attention to recurring themes, symbols, emotions. What is your psyche trying to tell you? Notice your projections. What do you judge most harshly in others? What qualities do you find irresistibly attractive? These are often shadows and unlived potentials you've disowned in yourself. The person who triggers your rage might be showing you your unlived power. The person you idealize might be reflecting your unlived potential. Practice what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. Instead of immediately resolving contradictions, sit with paradox. You can be both strong and sensitive, successful and spiritual, independent and connected. The goal isn't to choose sides, but to find the transcendent third that includes both. You've been looking for yourself in all the wrong places. Jung's Red Book isn't a manual with step-by-step instructions. It's a mirror, sometimes clear, sometimes dark, always revealing. And if you're brave enough to look into it, really look, you might see reflected back, not the person you think you should be, but the person you actually are underneath all the layers of performance and protection. You might see your shadow, not as something to be ashamed of, but as the repository of your power and authenticity. You might see your false personas, not as evil masks, but as outdated strategies that once served you, but now limit you. You might see your unlived masculine and feminine energies, not as opposites at war, but as complementary forces seeking integration. And at the center of it all, you might glimpse yourself, not as some perfected future version of who you could become, but as the essence of who you've always been, waiting patiently for you to remember. The journey home to yourself starts with a single sacred act, the willingness to see yourself clearly, to peel off the mask that's been suffocating your truth, to face the shadow that's been running your life from behind the scenes, to balance the divine energies within you that have been at war, to step outside the ego's tiny, fearful world and into the vastness of who you really are. This work isn't easy. It's not comfortable. It doesn't happen overnight. It requires courage, patience, and a willingness to be uncomfortable as you shed skin after skin of false identity. But it's the most important thing you'll ever do. Because on the other side of this integration, this individuation, this coming home to yourself, you don't just survive. You awaken. You stop living your life and start being your life. You stop seeking love and start embodying it. You stop trying to find your purpose and start recognizing that you are the purpose you've been seeking. You stop looking for meaning outside yourself and start creating meaning through the very act of being authentically you. Your authenticity is your gift to the world. And when you do this work, when you have the courage to become yourself, you give everyone around you permission to do the same. Your authenticity becomes a beacon that says, it's safe to be real here. Your wholeness becomes an invitation that whispers, you don't have to perform for my love. Your freedom becomes contagious, spreading like ripples through every relationship, every interaction, every space you enter. This is Jung's gift to us. Not a theory to understand, but a path to walk. Not a problem to solve, but a mystery to inhabit. Not a destination to reach, but a way of being to embody. Not a cure for the human condition, but a celebration of it. You were never lost. You were just hidden. From others, yes, but mostly from yourself. Hidden under layers of conditioning and expectation, under masks and roles and stories about who you're supposed to be. But you're still there, underneath it all. You've always been there, waiting. Now it's time to come home, to yourself, to your truth, to the life that's been waiting for you to stop performing and start living. If this stirred something in you, honor it. Like this video if it helped you see yourself more clearly. Share it with someone who's ready to stop hiding. And remember, the work isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been. The path is yours to walk. The self is yours to discover. The life is yours to live. Welcome home.